It seems like a strange place to look for insight into these modern days. You might wonder how I come up with these things to talk about. The truth is, I'm doing these presentations quite often, and where they usually start is in the middle of the night. And I'll get a picture in my head. And sometimes I'll have a dream. Sometimes during the day, something will flash into my head. And I see in pictures a lot, pictures and symbols, and they speak to me. And then from those pictures and symbols, my rational mind takes over. And I start looking into them, thinking about them. And that's kind of how these things happen. That's how this happened. Towards the beginning of the week, in the middle of the night, it just occurred to me that I needed to do a presentation about the Lord of the Rings. Don't ask me why, but I did. And some things about that occurred to me. And the next day, I put together the background that you see in our video right now. And I had that together. And that's what my presentation was going to be about. Of course, I still didn't have it all fleshed out. And then I started looking at things, and very soon I came across this. And it just struck me with how similar that is to the ring in The Lord of the Rings. Now, I don't know what significance it has or not, but it's rather interesting. I found this article in the Daily Star on June 18th. And it says, Ring of Fire eclipse could be a sign of the apocalypse, sending darkness over the Holy Land. The year's first solar eclipse with a ring of fire this Sunday will be the deepest one this century and coincides with the summer solstice, fueling doomsday believers' fears the end is nigh. And I think to people who are not believers, this all just seems superstitious and crazy that anyone might wonder if this is some kind of a heavenly sign. But for those who are Bible believers, there's a very good reason why we look at things that are happening in the heavens. Luke 21, 25, and 26 is a place where Messiah is telling us about the last days. And he says, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and on the earth, anxiety of nations, in perplexity. That rings a bell. Men fainting for fear and for expectation of things which are coming on the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So it really isn't too crazy that in such a time of anxiety and perplexity in the world, that people might think this ring of fire solar eclipse over the land of Israel might mean something. I learned from that article that there's also a lunar eclipse coming up on July 4th over America. Darkness covering the land. And then I saw this article entitled Land of the Worried. 83% of Americans very stressed over the nation's future. New survey shows 7 in 10 Americans agree that 2020 is the lowest point in the country's history that they've witnessed. The year 2020 feels like a crossroads for the United States. This was from Harris Poll Studies. This is a dark time in America and in the world. And I think this is why people are looking at these things to wonder the meaning. Certainly July 4th is an important day in America. And so people, of course, would attach significance to this. The Lord of the Rings, insights into the growing darkness of this last age. Now you know where the idea of growing darkness came from, right? What about this last age? Could it be that we actually have reached the last age? You know, it's interesting that even many people who are not Bible believers now are very worried. Very worried that this could be the last age for at least America and maybe for the world. What could a fantasy story like The Lord of the Rings have to say about any of this? It's just a fantasy story. But you know, there really is a little more to The Lord of the Rings than what some people might think. After all, The Lord of the Rings was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a Christian and therefore had somewhat of a biblical view. And that reality informed his books. And for example, one reviewer, back when the first of these Lord of the Rings books came out in 1954, said this about the books: a deeply, though never overtly Christian book with a subtle converting power, being the product of that rare thing, an entirely Christian imagination, it forces one throughout to breathe and enjoy the climate of faith. It is neither allegory nor sermon, though both may be extracted at will. Well, since I have that invitation, I decided to do that, to extract something like allegory, something like a sermon from The Lord of the Rings, because these themes are actually in the book. However, it's very subtle. As Tolkien said, I have not put in or have cut out practically, he says, I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion in his imaginary world. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. In other words, there are not individual characters that just have a one-for-one semblance to some biblical characters. It's really more about principles, timeless principles. And since so many people have read The Lord of the Rings, have seen the movies, it's a good thing that we have in common that we can look at to help us understand those concepts, some common ground from which we can talk, and that's really what I'm looking for here. So in this presentation, we'll look to biblical themes of the Lord of the Rings trilogy to glean greater clarity on what is really happening in these unprecedented times of growing darkness in the world. In the Lord of the Rings story, this is where it all happens, a place called Middle-earth. And we're going to see this as a literary picture of our world that we live in. Now, I just want to say, I'm not claiming that this is what Tolkien thought, okay? But because these principles are in his book, they can be applied this way. And of course, the name of the story is The Lord of the Rings. It's about the rings. So where we want to start here is considering the rings and who the Lord of the Rings is, and those who wear the rings. Let's take a look at that. We have the one who is behind all of this, who has the one ring, who created all of these rings, actually had them created. He's called the Dark Lord Sauron in the stories. And he's a clear Dark Lord. And who do you think of when you think of that term? Sauron, Satan, pretty close, right? So this first ring, the one ring, number one, I have it marked here, is the ring of Sauron. And you know that mystical looking inscription on the ring? That's elfish. And this is what that inscription says. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Doesn't that sound creepy? That's really creepy. That's because in the story, the Ring of Sauron embodies all of the evil powers of the Dark Lord Sauron, which he utilized to satisfy his insatiable greed to dominate the minds of all others. Sauron is the control freak of control freaks. He must control everything. All of these mind control rings come from him. You see, people don't always get that when they watch the movie or read the books, even though that's what the books are about, is mind control. That's what they're about, mind control. That's what the rings are about, mind control. And all of this mind control comes from the character of the Dark Lord. You know, there's no problem, really, in looking at Sauron, looking at Satan, and seeing the correspondence. It's all about mind control. And what are the mind control powers resident in the Dark Lord and in the ring? Well, these powers include temptation, deception, coercion, emotional hooks of many kinds, and supernatural powers that people often call magic, but I'm talking about the real magic. Here's the Ring of Sauron at work in this world. All kinds of mind control. An entire system full of mind control. 2 Corinthians 4:4 explains what this is all about. The God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving. Friends, that's mind control. That the light of the good news of the glory of Messiah, who is the image of God, should not dawn on them. All of the smoke and mirrors to guard and build up his kingdom and keep people from finding and entering the kingdom of Messiah. The inscription begins, one ring to rule them all. That means to rule all the other rings, rule all the people. But the rings are important because the rings define a certain order. And that's what's so interesting about this. The Ring of Sauron, embodying the evil character and powers of the Dark Lord Sauron, rules all the other rings. Once under the power of a ring from him, those wearing the ring are in his service, using the powers he generates, thinking they are serving themselves while actually serving him. The rings actually picture something. They actually are like a visual representation of the things that the Dark Lord uses to attract and control people. And that's something different for different people. You know, for some people, it's fame. For some, it's glory. For some, it's power. For some, it's gold. For some, it's other things which might seem very esoteric to you or me, but are the thing that is important to that person. And what is amazing is how these hooks that the enemy can get into people can rule them and turn them into servants of the enemy, unknowing many times, thinking they're just serving their own lusts, not realizing that that's really serving the enemy. Yes, we are talking about temptation. Now, be honest, when you look at this graphic, you see the sign, do not push the button. What is the first thing you want to do? Am I right? You want to push the button. You see, we already have it within us, right? In our fallen nature, we want to rebel. And the enemy knows that. And he knows what your particular buttons are. And he doesn't really want to push your buttons. He wants you to push your own buttons. That's really what he's up to. The book of James kind of explains the process. It says, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. Then the lust, when it has conceived, bears sin, and the sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Don't be deceived, my beloved brothers. Yes, it is a deception, the deceptive power of sin. And Satan knows exactly what to dangle, when to dangle it, and how to accomplish what he's after. But it's really up to the individual how they will respond, and this comes across in the movie quite a few different times along the line as we look at the difference between the people who satisfy that lust for the ring and the ones that don't. One ring to find them. The Dark Lord Sauron takes the form of a giant eye of fire. And when you see it in the movie, it's really scary. And when you see one of the characters put on the ring, and then Sauron knows as soon as that happens and finds him. The Dark Lord Sauron takes the form of a giant eye of fire. He is not all-seeing, but he wants to be. His mind control rings allow him to see all who wear them, so that he can then exercise his powers over them to control them, and through them others. Compare what he's doing with the all-knowing, all-seeing creator of the universe. He doesn't need all this, the creator of the universe, because he is omnipresent. He's everywhere at all times, knows everything at all times. It's his universe, so there's nothing wrong with that. The Dark Lord, who has risen up to compete with him, has to find another way, because he is not all-seeing or all-powerful. So he has done it through technological means. He's done it through the order of the hierarchy that is building up, and he's never been able to see more than he can see right now, because technology has so far extended the sight of those who serve him, and then through that going back to the enemy. So he is absorbing so much. He is finding people. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and on. He's finding us to feed all of us his mind control. Those raised up in this internet age feel its influence the most. They don't know another world. This all seems so normal to them to have these huge internet conglomerates controlling so much of what they think, so much of what they do. One ring to bring them all. All of this is used to control the ring wearers, in other words, those with their own particular addiction, and then use them to bring still others under his power. Failing that, he uses them to destroy all who resist. Have you noticed how nasty things are getting? Have you noticed how mean-spirited the world has become? His dark kingdom is a hierarchical system, a well-oiled machine designed to constantly dominate and expand his dark kingdom. At what point does he have enough control? At what point can he see enough into your life? Infinity. There's no end. Do you see it in the world around you? Do you experience it? That's not just technology. That's the eye of Sauron. Insatiable. To bring everyone over to his side. And that's the last line. In the darkness, to bind them. When the same lies are repeated over and over again everywhere, when everyone around you believes and acts in those lies, then everything you know is wrong. This is the world we live in. We think we know. We think we really do, because we need something to go on. But what do you know? What you read in the papers, what you see on TV, what you see in the videos. All of this is meant to bring people. You know, what's so interesting about it is that there's a sort of unified message in all of it. And that's because the big five conglomerates control the majority of the media. And so they're all very much in agreement with what they put out there. It is propaganda. However, it exerts a great deal of pressure within the culture to conform. Because when you see this everywhere, it makes you think everybody else believes this, and you're out of line if you don't believe it too. It binds you. Once one has been brought under the power of the Dark Kingdom, the Dark Lord Sauron binds one in place, using the considerable powers of the system, as well as temptation, deception, coercion, emotional hooks, and supernatural powers. The system. He binds us into the system. He has deliberately made all of us debt slaves. That's what he's tried to do. Why? In fact, for instance, I live in the United States. Our whole country is a debt slave to the tune of trillions of dollars. Do you think those people that have lent the money to the United States, trillions of dollars, have any control over what the politicians do, what the government decides, what happens in America? Trillions of dollars? Do you think that trickles down to affect your life? And what about you? How many people spend the biggest part of their day every day doing stuff they hate? Being miserable. Why are they doing that? Debt. They must do it to live. That's all they know. That's all they've learned. Does the system own you? What does that make you? Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rule the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Some people think the slaves have been set free. Maybe they ought to think about that again. So we go now from the one ring of Sauron to the 9 rings that are worn by the Nazgul. And these are some really nasty creatures in the movie. They are the invisible elite servants of the enemy. They're his top elite. And those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their downfall. They fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore and of the domination of the one which was Sauron's. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring. And they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul were they, the ring wraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. I'm thinking, aren't these people a lot like the elite of our world? Are they not wraiths as well? Soulless beings that no one ever sees? Faceless beings who nevertheless are controlling our world? Interesting, isn't it? They are behind all of this. Most of us probably don't even know who all these organizations are. So I'll use a little shorthand. This is all the organizations of the global elite, established by them to set the standards for the world, to set the direction of where the world is going, to control your life and mine, and to get all of us to agree to it. which so many people, unfortunately, do without even realizing the opinions they hold are not their own. They have come from the invisible elite through the channels of communication that are all around us, then echoed through the culture in this echo chamber that we all live in, which then changes us all into the course, the direction, and the way in which the elite would have us go. You know, things that used to be considered conspiracy theories now are coming to light, and more people see it because the evidence is actually so great as to where this has all come from. And yet, most of these people who are involved are nameless, faceless people, even though they have so much power. In the book, the Witch King of Angmar is the chief of the elite. And he was corrupted by one of the 9 rings of power. He is a king, a warrior, and a sorcerer. Really, all these guys are sorcerers because they all have received their great wealth and their great rewards from Satan. And trust me, they all know him and he knows them. They're the closest ones to him. How could they not? Could this chief of all of these roughly correspond with the coming anti-Messiah? Thessalonians 2, 9, and 10 talks about him, the coming anti-Messiah. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Oh, he comes in sheep's clothing, at most by that outward presentation, just like the world system. You know, everything they're doing is good, right? Trying to save us from ourselves. You need to do this for your own safety. You need to do this to save the world. You need to do this to save your neighbors. But in the end, who is it really for? Daniel 8, 24 and 25 talk about this one who is coming. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. His power comes from Satan. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper. Under his rule he shall destroy many in their prosperity. He'll have a lot to offer, and people will be lining up to fill their pockets, and they will be destroyed by what they receive. Then we have Temul, the second chief of the elite Nazgul. You know, I find this interesting, the difference between the Creator and Satan. When the Creator chooses someone, say for instance when he chose Noah, he didn't have a backup. He didn't have a number 2. When he chose Moses, he had no backup. When Moses said, well, I don't want to do it, he said, you're going. He doesn't need a plan B because his plan A is perfect. Satan needs a plan B, because his plans aren't perfect, even if they're pretty effective most of the time. So he's got someone else waiting in the wings, seemingly serving the number one, but always waiting next in line, even looking for his opportunity if he can overturn that one, because the whole system of Satan is based on selfishness and greed and going after more power. So none of these people can trust one another, ever. Then we have other rings. And these are not the ones that belong to Sauron's elite. And in the stories, there's various ones that get these rings. And this is just too big for us to talk about. We can't discuss all of these characters. So we simply want to say these other rings are all about expanding the Lord of the Rings power to as many as he can control. And we know that's what he's doing. And lately, he's expanding a lot. A lot. The Dark Lord controls the masses through the same methods he uses on everyone: temptation, deception, coercion, emotional hooks, and supernatural powers. 2 Thessalonians 2:11 and 12 describes that mindset. God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. You see, sometimes people wonder, how come God doesn't do something about this? Why doesn't he stop these people from deceiving the whole world? And what we find in 2 Thessalonians, it's the will of God to give them the opportunity to do their worst, to deceive you. To find out, do you love the truth? Do you take pleasure in unrighteousness? Or are you going to choose to seek out the truth like it were gold, but more than gold, and to seek out the righteousness that he offers? You see, it's his way of separating people. And on this earth, which way do you think most people go? It's not surprising that Satan feels so successful, because most of the time he really is. Most of the time he is. Because, sadly, most of us prefer to cater to our lower nature. And so it makes it easy for him. However, don't be fooled by that, because at the end of this story, righteousness will win the day, which will not be good for all of those who made the wrong choice. Well, this brings us to the war, raising up the orc army. And in The Lord of the Rings, you have this happen. There's this growing darkness, and even though Sauron has what seems to be a perfect plan, he knows that not everyone will submit. Not everyone will be tempted. Not everyone wants those things and wants to be in servitude. Excuse me. So he knows there must be a war. His lust for control of every person is too great for him to let any be free. And this brings war on Middle-earth. Where will he find the army for the war? For this, he would turn to the race that is forever young, the elves. Here they are. When you look at that, you might wonder, why would people like this, with a beautiful idyllic life and a beautiful idyllic place, ever want to become part of Sauron's army? Well, the truth is, they wouldn't. So he has to use the powers of the ring to turn some of them, not all of them, into his army of darkness. This reminded me of 1 Peter 5:8, where we're warned, be sober and self-controlled, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. You know, when looking at them in their idyllic setting, these beautiful people, why would they be watching for a deceiver? Sometimes we're like that, aren't we? We get very absorbed in our lives. We don't realize that the enemy is looking to destroy us. Well, nevertheless, he has his plan, and this is what his plan is with the elves. Pretty ugly, huh? You know, this is the thing about a fantasy or a movie. It depicts inner realities in something you can see with your eye. And it's rather amazing when the plot reveals that these ugly and nasty orcs actually were created from the elves. Couldn't be more different, right? And when I look at this and I see these beautiful young people who, by the way, are forever young, they're immortal. And this reminds me of the young people, because there's always a new generation of young people. In that sense, they're forever young. There's always new ones. And it is the young, in all the decades of my life, who have been targeted for conversion into the army of the Dark Lord. This has been going on for decades. These are the people they target. And turning the elves into the orcs is like turning these beautiful young lives into this other thing that we've been seeing going on with the young people. Who is it that's burning down buildings? Who is it that is shouting obscenities at police officers and doing worse? Who is it that have become lawless mobs? Is it not, by and large, the young people? Don't you wonder how that can happen? You know, I happen to be blessed with some wonderful young people in my life. I think that's such a beautiful time in life. You know, young folks are filled with so many good things, so many good characteristics, so much wonderful life, curiosity about things, and they're always finding every day new characteristics in their life and virtues that they can share with others. That's what should be normal for young people, and is for a lot of them. And that's why it's so shocking to see this kind of a transformation. Don't you wonder how this can happen? Well, for the orcs, you saw it. It was done by evil magic power. What does that actually look like in the real world? Looks a lot like that. Daycare. A lot of times, it begins before a child can even walk. Very, very little time at home with one's parents. Then K through 12. What is this? Could this really be the Dark Lord's indoctrination center that people are taking their kids to, thinking they're preparing them for the future? Yeah, they are preparing them for the future, the devil's future. We need to wake up. Parents, please, wake up. Think about what is happening with your precious children. The first step in turning an elf into an orc is to erase all sense of elfish identity. You see, if these elves had any sense of who they were, who their families were, where they came from, what they were about, would they ever be tempted to even be involved? So the first thing that has to happen is you have to take all of that away, all of that sense of identity. You have to have a blank slate to write the programming on. So mind control job number one is this 16-year program, erase where you come from and who you are. We have this kid in the classroom. Will somebody tell me who I really am? Well, now they've made it even worse because they tell you you don't really know whether you're a boy or a girl. Your parents are stupid, old-fashioned, and we'll tell you what to believe. Proverbs 22, 5 through 7, I think, is a good verse to think about while we're going through this. It says, thorns and snares are in the path of the wicked. Whoever guards his soul stays from them. What a good principle. Stay away from the wicked. And I would add, keep your kids away from the wicked. Even a bigger thing. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's your job as a parent. God has given that to you as your job. Don't farm it out to somebody that's going to teach your kid how to become a communist. Some educators, many educators, are very worried about their experience as educators. Inevitably, when people start out as educators, they think it's going to be a great thing. They think they're going to be able to have a wonderful influence on the youth and help to prepare them for the future. And of course, this is what should be happening. Here is a well-known professor talking about his experience in some of the major colleges of the world. He says, my students are know-nothings. Their brains are largely empty, devoid of any substantial knowledge that might be the fruits of an education in an inheritance and a gift of a previous generation. They are the culmination of Western civilization, a civilization that has forgotten nearly everything about itself, and as a result has achieved near-perfect indifference to its own culture. This is the big difference, I think, between baby boomers and my generation and younger people. You know, people of my generation, we actually learned something about the world we came from. And we knew something about the history of the country we're from and about the sacrifices that people made along the way to make the country what it is. And whether we liked all those people or not, we all recognized that was part of the story that brought us here. And we had respect for that. Now the attitude is burn it all down. It means nothing because the generation that is being pushed in this direction doesn't have those kinds of connections. They don't have a historical past. And what historical past they do have is so distorted that they are ashamed of it. And so just feel even more like burning it all down. This man is taught at Princeton, Georgetown, and Notre Dame. These are not thought of as like Berkeley or something, right? He goes on, we have fallen into the bad and unquestioned habit of thinking that our educational system is broken, but it is working on all cylinders. Do you get that? It's doing just what it's planned for it to be doing. So we're seeing our kids, so many of them, graduating from high school, and they can't even effectively read, let alone tell you anything about history. What our educational system aims to produce is cultural amnesia. It's all about diversity, social justice today, even though they don't really know what that means either. It goes on, our students are the achievement of a systematic commitment to producing individuals without a past, for whom the future is a foreign country, cultureless ciphers who can live anywhere and perform any kind of work without inquiring about its purposes or ends. Perfect tools for an economic system that prizes flexibility. The current fad of diversity signals thoroughgoing commitment to decultured and relentless homogenization. Is this not exactly what you would want out of a mindless slave? The system is giving the elite exactly what they're paying for. Now, I've just chosen selected things because this is a very long and comprehensive article. And I wish I could have included all of it because there's great insight in this article by Patrick Deneen. And he's a professor of constitutional studies at Notre Dame. He's a man who knows something about history. He says, I love my students, but I weep for them for what is rightfully theirs, but hasn't been given. I discern their longing and anguish, and I know that their innate human desire to know who they are, where they've come from, where they ought to go, and how they ought to live. The world they have inherited, a world without inheritance, without past, future, or deepest cares, is about to come tumbling down. The future depends on them. Do you understand the crisis this is? It has been a long-standing principle in every culture of the world for thousands of years that the older generation passes on to the younger generation who they come from, what they're about, what their history is. Can you imagine this? To hold that back and even distort it, leaving generations of young people without a sense of who they really are. This may be the biggest crime of the world's elite. Erasing the mind, denying that sense of understanding of where one comes from and who one is. That was job number one. Job number two in this mind control plan is to teach your children, you're smart, your parents are stupid. And that's what it seems like to the kids. How much time are they learning from their parents compared to the time they spend learning in school? If the parents are farming out their kids to the school to teach them, what does that imply before you even get to anything else? Doesn't that imply that the parents feel that the school is smarter than they are? That the school's opinion, the teachers there, is more correct than their own opinion? So when you send the child to school, right there, what's happening is you are setting up the teachers in this school to be greater authorities in the lives of your children than you yourself are. Nevertheless, natural ties are very powerful. And to whatever extent you are able to spend time with your children, talk to them about real things, teach them about real things, they know the difference between being loved and not being loved, and that matters. So this is a problem for the mind control system, and they realize they've got to neutralize the parents. Because if the parents are taken seriously, their experience and common sense could blow the whole mind control project. And for some, thankfully, it does. Mind control job number 3. Fill the void with globalist propaganda. See, once you have a clean slate, then the mind is looking for something to fill that space. Now, the mind control can fill that space. That's the idea. And they are filling it with globalist propaganda. Here's another teacher, by the way, who writes, I am a witness to brainwashing in public schools. The U.S. education system is brainwashing, indoctrinating students with utopian, false, and fairy tale notions about socialism and communism. While teaching U.S. history, world history, economics, and American government for 5 long years to high school students, I was absolutely shocked and dismayed. In both of my experiences, the state standards which dictate the curriculum were chock full of pro-socialist, anti-capitalist rhetoric. What is that about? That is about making Western civilization hate itself. What does that lead to? What does making people loathe themselves lead to? Well, it is mental illness, and at its worst, it leads to suicide. Is it any wonder we're watching Western civilization willingly walking off a cliff right now? Because they all hate themselves. They all hate where they're from, and they feel like they got to pay the price. Mind control job number 4. Reinforce the globalist propaganda everywhere. Why? Because everyone everywhere can't be wrong. Everything you know is wrong. It's all mind control. But it seems like it's right because it's all you ever see, it's all you ever hear. And everybody else believes it. And most all of this is targeting the young. So people grow up into this big deception. And in this kind of situation, the pressure to conform is immense. But it gets worse. It gets a lot worse than this. Mind control job number 5. Send them out as activists for the globalist cause. Look at these kids in school. These are a bunch of high school students. Who do you think is encouraging them to do this? You know, as I look at this, some of these faces, they don't look like this kind of motion would make you think they looked. You know, I think of that as the sort of a gesture a person would use when they're really feeling something inside. A lot of these young kids, their face is blank. They show no emotions here. They look like mind control slaves to me, doing what they're taught to do. Now, in talking about all of this about school, all of this about mind control, I don't want to be misunderstood. Because I don't mean to be criticizing the young people. This is not a criticism of the young people because they are victims of this system. It is a condemnation of globalists who are using these young people, who are doing this to them. And personally, I resent this deeply. I think we all ought to. Here we have another professor writing, who also says about brainwashing that professors are brainwashing students. An ex-communist Romanian-born academic recently left his tenured position at Columbia University because the Ivy League school is on its way toward full-blown communism. According to the National Association of Scholars, out of nearly 9,000 professors from 51 of the top-rated schools, the number of liberal, socialist, to conservative communications faculty members is 108 to 0. 0. Many professors spend class time indoctrinating students with their personal political views, telling students what to think instead of how to think. He lamented over the liberal bullying going on in classrooms. Any conservative influence left by their parents at home is no longer an obstacle for these masters of indoctrination. There is such an atmosphere in these colleges that is oppressing these students and forcing them into this way of thinking. Allowing schools to tell students what to think rather than how to think can be construed as brainwashing, not teaching. An agenda where opposing views are shouted down leaves us with one generation after another tilted in the direction of socialism. You know, doing this study for this presentation, although I knew a lot of these things, really was explaining a lot for me because I've watched videos. I'm very interested in what's happening with young people, and I've watched videos about people going in to speak on college campuses, and in some cases sharing a view that is not a popular view, but isn't an evil view. It's just a different point of view. And watching these young people scream at them, holler obscenities at them, and tell them to shut up, and making it absolutely impossible for any other point of view to ever be spoken. This is un-American. You know, I'm not like a big political person. I'm not a big flag-waving kind of person. But I do know what it is to be an American because it's written in our Constitution. America is supposed to be about freedom. One of those freedoms is the freedom of speech. That's how you get things done, friends, is you talk it out. That's all gone now. It's all about drowning out the other person, not allowing them to be heard. That's what's happening. And who's behind it? the professors in college, the teachers along the way, the system that is behind them, ruining these young people, so many of them. You know what is so amazing? What I find so amazing is that despite this incredible onslaught of mind control, there are as many young people as there are who break free from all of that. It's absolutely incredible, and much to the credit of those who are able to do that. But I still feel very sorry for the ones who are not. So I just want to stress again, none of this that I'm sharing is a condemnation of those young people who are victims of this system. It is a condemnation of the globalists who are behind all of this to turn them into slaves to work their system, an army they can use to bring in their global government. So we wonder, after these decades of brainwashing the young, just how successful has the Dark Lord been in raising up his mind-controlled army? Pretty successful. This, as I said, is not all young people, but it is more than enough for the elite's purposes. The mindless grunt army of the globalist elite is complete. They have managed to ruin enough beautiful young people that they can get them to go out there and echo their mind control to the world. And how have they done it? Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, everything else. Look at the crowd here. If you look closely at this crowd, what you'll notice is they're all young people, with very few exceptions. Why? Because it is the young people who are most affected by the internet. They grew up in it. They don't know anything else. Where do they turn to when they have a question? Google. And where has it brought us? Well, here's what I found looking at studies about this. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation 2019 annual report on U.S. attitudes towards socialism, communism, and collectivism. One of the things in this report, 70% of millennials say they are likely to vote socialist. 70%. You wonder why they think differently than you do? Only about half of millennials believe the Declaration of Independence better guarantees freedom and equality over the Communist Manifesto. That's just shocking, isn't it? I'm glad there's still about 50% that think the Declaration of Independence is better. But how deep does that go in the direction that all of this is working? How did so many millennials and post-millennials become so favorable to globalist propaganda? As we've seen, they've been mind-controlled slaves all their lives. All their lives. And we, their parents, we've been debt slaves all our lives, which is why we have allowed this to happen. we've needed a place for our kids to be so that we can go out and take our part in building wealth for the elite, just to get by. You know, this modern world that's supposed to be so great, it's a horror. It's a horror show. How does the mind control program spanning the decades translate into an army for the Dark Lord's globalist plan? Let's look at more of the numbers. Here are the generations as they've been defined. The oldest generation is what they call the silent generation, born between 1928 to 1945. This is according to the Pew Research Center. My generation, the baby boomer generation, are the generation that was born between 1946 to or through 1964. Generation X in this chart are the people born 1965 through 1980. And the millennial generation were born in 1981 through 1996. The post-millennials are not shown, but now they too are growing up and will have a growing effect on the world. As we look at the births underlying each generation, we see that the baby boomer, and the reason they have the name, big generation, and the other generations, Generation X, is less. Probably because during that time there's a lot of emphasis on women going to work in the workplace. And that reduced time in the family. That ended up reducing the number of children. The millennial generation rebounded in size. And then we have the post-millennials, which is roughly the same as the millennials in size. Now, here's the interesting thing that I want to bring to your attention. In America, and this really reflects other countries too, a demographic tipping point was reached in 2016. In that year, the number of millennials surpassed the previously dominant baby boomers, putting the millennials in the most dominant position within the culture. Have you noticed much of a change since about that time in the culture? The lead of the millennials over the baby boomers since then has been growing exponentially. You see how they don't really need to add many people because the older generations, the silent generation, the boomer generation, is declining pretty rapidly. The millennials and Generation X together already form the dominant bloc in society. And this is without even considering the post-millennials, the young people who are just now entering adulthood. So that means this bloc, the younger bloc who has been more affected by this mind control program that has been perfected more and more through these years, have come into this dominant position and are going to be dominating more and more in really every sense. It is this block of young generations that now determines the trajectory of the decade ahead and beyond. Now, again, I don't want to be taken as being negative towards all young people, all millennials. I don't really believe that, because I have millennials in my life who are awesome people, and they don't reflect the things that we've learned that so many people, so many young people have absorbed through this mind control program. They have bucked the system in order to choose a different way. And I have great respect for that. But my point in showing this is realizing that there is such a majority among the younger people who really have been greatly affected by this mind control means that the world is dramatically changing because of this tipping that is happening, this demographic change. And I want to share this with you because, particularly for people who are from an earlier generation, much of this just seems like craziness. We can hardly understand at all why people would even do the things we're seeing them do. But it's not their fault. They are, in fact, responding to mind control. It doesn't make sense. That's why it seems crazy. But it does make sense to them because they've been imprinted with a different set of values, a different idea of what the world is about, and this is what is controlling their choices. Now, hopefully what will happen is that the same thing will happen for them that happened for us in our day, that some of the things that we believed, perhaps things that we had been indoctrinated in, were shown up to be wrong just through life. Because, you see, you can't really argue with the truth eventually. The truth will always win out in the end. And some of these bright young people who may still be under this control will see that, and they will adjust their thinking to reality. So I by no means am pessimistic that all of these people are lost. I don't want to be misunderstood that way. But the preponderance of where this is going, I think, is still pretty scary and explains a lot about what we're seeing in these days. For this to be complete, I just need to bring in one other very significant demographic tipping point. See, there's a lot that's changing all at one time, and that complicates the situation even more. What this chart shows, now we're focusing on young people. On the first day of 2020, whites under the age of 18 were already in the minority. This is a huge change, demographic change in America. And it's bound to have something to do with how things change in the future. So while there remain fine young people who've not fallen to the mind control, sadly enough have to give the globalists the army they need. I guess how I wrote that is, sadly, enough have fallen to the mind control to give the globalists the army they need. Like this. These ads have really been run. In some of these riots, one of the things that was in the news is that in each of these cities, there were piles of bricks delivered into place. That's not cheap. That costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of planning. Now that they have created their anarchist army, what do you think? Do you think they're going to stop? Who has the real power in America? What does it tell you that nothing has been done significantly to stop these riots or to change the trajectory that all this is headed in. Who has the power? I watched a presentation the other night by a very frustrated commentator, well known, who was really angry at the Republicans because they're all too afraid to stand up and do anything about the lawlessness, the violence, and even the murder that has been taking place during these riots. Who has the power? The elite army, clearly, is occupying the superior position at this point. This plan has been underway for a long time. I think many of us know this. David Rockefeller was one of the elite, very much at the center of this, and his famous statement was, all we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order. Well, I think they're trying all of them until they find which is the right one. What do you think about COVID-19? Do you think that could be the right one? Do you think burning down the country, do you think that might be the right one? What about economic collapse? Could that be the right one? They'll keep trying them all until they get the right one. 2030 is the target date for the UN global government. What do we have ahead of us? A rising darkness, very similar to what we see in the Lord of the Rings stories. A rising darkness. A horrible decade is ahead of us, culminating in an even worse time. Boy, I'm so cheery, aren't I? The Dark Lord and his elite seek total control over everyone and everything. They're like sharks smelling blood. They know how close they are. They have the technology. They've managed to change the culture so significantly. They have their army under control. They're getting all their dominoes in a row. They're very close. According to Bible prophecy, the darkness overspreading the earth will take us to the Great Tribulation, and don't think it's that long away. Certainly 2030 is their definite date to begin their global government. It's written into the agreement that all the nations of the earth signed in 2015 that we refer to as Agenda 2030. My seminar on the book of Daniel goes into these things in detail. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. What will you do in the face of the growing darkness? Will you just ignore it and think your life is going to go on as normal? Or will you realize there is a battle between white and black? I don't mean that in the racial sense. Light and darkness. I mean that in the spiritual sense. What side are you on? What side will you be on? What will you do about it? Consider this. I am not a wizard. That's what I don't like about the books, by the way. They have a lot of magic in them. I don't like it. Gandalf is a good wizard. I don't believe there are good wizards. But nevertheless, he occupies a certain place in the book of a person that sees what's coming before it gets there, who knows what to do. And in that respect, Messiah has given me sight to see what others don't see. I've seen these things ahead of time. I saw what's happening now decades ago, back in January, at the beginning of the year, when articles were coming out saying what a fantastic decade we were entering into. In my newsletter, I had a picture of a roller coaster going into fire, telling you just how rough this was going to be, that we were going to be facing a series of shocks. Then what happened? Exactly that. I see things before many others see them. I saw this time decades ago, wrote about it, and now it's here. Why am I talking about this? Because we are in a crisis. The world is in a crisis. People are confused. People are perplexed. They don't know where to turn. I've been working on this all my life. I've been preparing for this all my life. I need to tell you that. I need you to know that. I'm not telling you that I can stop the darkness. I'm not talking about taking up the force of arms against anybody or hurting anyone. Nevertheless, I am an old soldier in this war, in the spiritual battle. And I know things that can help you. I've produced a vast body of information specifically designed to help you get through this time. I've been building up all of that for years and still am, to help you get through this time, whatever your age might be, whether you're a young person or an older person. I do want to say that in view of what I've just been going through and the burden involved in actually considering what is happening with our younger generation, I feel right now such a sense of concern for the younger people, and I want you to come. I want you to come. I want you to look at something different than what you've been shown. I want to give you a chance. That's why I'm talking about myself right now. I am freely sharing what I know with others and with you. And even while I do this, I'm frustrated because it's not easy for you to get what I have to share. You're not going to get this in a 5-minute video on YouTube. You'll have to work at this. If you really want this, you'll have to dig into this. This is going to take hours of your time. This is far more important to you than a college education that you spend $100,000 for. This is your life. Everything you've known that they've tried to teach you, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. But there is a place to turn where it's right. And when you have that, it changes everything. You don't know what I know. So when you start looking into it, you're going to think it's not even relevant to the problem. But those few who forge forward, for them, it's going to start coming together. And they're going to start to see the relevance, and their own lives will start to change. You will need this in its time. You know, some things are not useful to you at all, except when the right time comes. You know, if you get lost in the woods, you don't usually need to have some matches with you. You don't usually need to carry a compass with you. But those things would really come in handy if you got lost in the woods. That's the kind of things I'm talking about. Things that may not be relevant to you in your everyday life in the past, but with what is coming upon the world, very relevant. Things you need. You need to get those things now. You need to have them when you need them. That's what I'm telling you. You know why I'm doing this? Do you know what? I'm an old man, okay? I'm 70 years old. Why aren't I out on the golf course playing golf? Why aren't I sitting on my rocking chair? Do you know? It's because I care. And it's because you need me. Because I've spent my whole life to bring me to this point. So I have a place in this battle that can make a difference for others. And I have a motive. I'm committed to the one true king, the real king, who will come to win this war. So I'm under no delusions that I can win it, that I'm that person that's going to save the world. No, I'm not that person. I am the person that can help other people make it that far to be here when that happens. I can't guarantee that, but you'll have a lot better chance if you come with me. Kind of like the Terminator movie. If you want to live, come with me. Do you have any idea how many people are going to die? It's a whole other issue. When I speak about my king, I'm not speaking about King Aragorn, the fictional king of Lord of the Rings. There's a lot about him that does illustrate certain aspects of Messiah. But no other king in a book or in real life could even come close to who the real Messiah, the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, actually is. He is the only answer for this world. If he does not return and take up his rightful rule over this earth, you're doomed. It's that simple. All of my hope and trust is in him. That's where I'm coming from. Here's the final reason you should listen to me and take this seriously. Because he it was that sent me to you. This is why I've had this passion in my life, all of my life. This is why this is what I do all day, every day. Because he sent me. Daniel 12, 9 and 10 are of interest. For the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. But those who are wise shall understand. Are you one of the wise or one of the wicked? It all comes down to this. I have hundreds of hours of vital information to share with you now. Hundreds of hours. You better get started. TSIYON.net. Sign up free of charge and get started while you can. That's the Lord of the Rings, Insights into the Growing Darkness of this last age. Let's pray together. Our Father, we come before your throne looking seriously at the point that we have come to, where we are right now in this age. We have reached a tipping point in a number of ways that are all converging at the same time. Technology is so rapidly advancing. Things are changing on a global scale. Society is changing. And the demographics in the world are greatly changing. In every generation, Satan deceives people. But Father, this generation that has come up, that is now taking over the world, has been subjected to greater mind control than any generation ever in history. Even greater, Father, than notorious cults that I've dealt with in the past. Jim Jones, Father, people like that have nothing on the elite and what they have done with our young people and with our whole society. Father, the world has gone crazy. The world is mad because of this mind control, and it is driving us all to a place where finally people will say, please, anything in order to stop all of this, in order to have some peace and quiet. And they will give in. And we know it is written in the book, Father. Here we are at this dark time. You have raised up writers in the past, people like Tolkien, who have helped to explain how these things work, that explain what it is that corrupts men, what it is that drives men to righteous deeds, heroic things, and the difference, Father, between the righteous and the wicked. Things, Father, that help us to shape our character. And I do want to thank you for works like this that help to inform those who want to find something deeper to understand the world. But Father, ultimately these things fail in comparison to your inspired word. And Father, that's where the answers really are. You've prophesied of these days. You've told us what this is all about. And you tell us who we really are. It is a time, Father, for us to rise up, to learn who we really are and what we're called to really be. Father, I just pray that if there are any hearing this tonight who have that emptiness inside, who are feeling that fact that they have a longing to know who they really are. They have a longing to be someone whom they don't even know yet that they're called to be. I pray, Father, that you will bring them, that you will feed them, that you will teach them, that you will enlighten them, and that you will set them on the path, Father, and they will be prepared for the things that are coming. Father, I just want to pray for your people, the light of the world, who are facing the great darkness that is descending over the face of the land throughout this world. Father, do away with our delusions that things are going to get better. Help us to have a change of mind and attitude to prepare ourselves for this dark time that is rising up before us. Father, and bring us through it. Bring us through it. Help us, Father, to learn that we need to put you first, to learn your ways, to walk in your ways, to honor you. And Father, we pray for the Lord Yeshua, that he might come quickly. In his name we pray, the name of Yeshua, Messiah, our great King.